3 seconds. That's how long it takes him to cross a ballroom full of the most beautiful, most carefully prepared women in the kingdom and stop directly in front of me, the one person who spent the evening trying to disappear into the wallpaper. The room has gone silent in that specific way. That means everyone is recalculating their understanding of reality. 300 women in silk and jewels, months of preparation, family fortunes spent on this single night, and he walked past every single one of them. "You," he says, and his gold eyes are fixed on me like nothing else in the room exists. I look down at my plain gray dress, the one I chose specifically because it wouldn't draw attention, and I understand, with a sinking feeling, that I have made a catastrophic miscalculation about how invisibility works. The ceremony I never wanted to be here. This needs to be understood clearly, because everything that happens tonight only makes sense if you understand that I attended the mating ceremony under duress, dragged by an aunt who saw an unclaimed Omega niece as a failure that needed correcting before the neighbors noticed. "You're 23, she'd said, 3 weeks ago, holding up a swatch of blue silk against my skin like I was livestock being appraised for market. Every eligible Omega in the kingdom will be there. This is your chance." "I don't want a chance," I told her. "I want to be left alone." She didn't listen. Obviously, aunts who see marriage as the solution to every problem rarely do. So here I am, standing at the edge of the grand ballroom in the palace, wearing the plainest gray dress I own, a small rebellion, the only one available to me, while 300 other Omegas glitter under chandeliers in gowns that cost more than my aunt's entire yearly income. The mating ceremony happens once a decade, when an alpha king reaches the age where the kingdom expects him to choose a mate. Every eligible Omega from every province is invited, presented, displayed like the finest goods a kingdom can produce. Families spend years preparing daughters for this single night, dress fittings, dance lessons, careful cultivation of whatever qualities might catch an alpha's interest. I spent the preparation time in the library, not out of defiance exactly, more out of the practical understanding that I have no interest in being claimed by a stranger, however powerful, however wealthy, however celebrated. I've read enough history to know that mating ceremonies produce marriages built on spectacle, not substance. I'd rather stay unclaimed and unremarkable than become someone's carefully chosen ornament. So tonight, I'm doing the only thing within my power, making myself as forgettable as possible. I chose the gray dress deliberately, plain wool, no embellishment, the kind of garment that disappears into a crowd of silk and jewels. I arranged my hair simply, without the elaborate styling most of the other Omegas spent hours achieving. I positioned myself at the very back of the ballroom, near a pillar that offers both shadow and a convenient escape route to the gardens. My plan is simple. Survive the ceremony without being noticed, return home, and spend the next decade being grateful I dodged a fate I never wanted. It's a good plan. It fails spectacularly. The arrival King Aldrich enters the ballroom exactly at 9 o'clock, and the entire room shifts around his presence like water rearranging itself around a stone. I've never seen him in person before, only in the formal portraits displayed throughout the kingdom, which somehow managed to be both accurate and completely inadequate. He's taller than the portraits suggest, moves with a predatory grace that portraits can't capture, and carries himself with the kind of casual authority that comes from never once questioning his right to occupy space. The gold in his eyes is visible even from my position at the back of the room. The presentation begins immediately, each Omega called forward by name and province, curtsying, offering whatever brief conversation etiquette allows before he moves to the next. It's efficient in a way that feels almost cruel. 300 women reduced to a receiving line, each given perhaps 90 seconds to prove they're worth further consideration. I watch him move through the crowd with detached fascination, safe in my position near the pillar, confident my name won't be called for hours given the alphabetical ordering and my family's relatively low provincial standing. The women ahead of me are extraordinary, genuinely, dazzlingly extraordinary, daughters of merchant princes and provincial lords, dressed in gowns that represent months of careful design, trained in exactly the kind of charming conversation that's supposed to catch an alpha's attention. I watch him greet each one with the same polite, distant courtesy, moving through them like items on a very long list. He doesn't linger with anyone, doesn't show particular interest, just moves, methodical and unhurried, through hundreds of women who've spent their entire adult lives preparing for exactly this moment. I relax slightly, watching from my shadow, grateful to be irrelevant enough that my turn won't come for hours, if it comes at all, given how quickly the evening seems to be progressing toward its natural conclusion. Then, something happens that breaks the entire pattern. He stops, not at anyone in the formal receiving line. He stops in the middle of the ballroom floor, between presentations, and turns, slowly, deliberately, toward the back of the room, toward the pillar, toward me. The moment I don't understand what's happening until it's already happening, which is perhaps the most honest way to describe the next 30 seconds of my life. He walks away from the receiving line entirely, walks past the current Omega mid-curtsy, past the master of ceremonies who's visibly confused by this break in protocol, past dozens of women who turn to watch him move through the crowd, with an expression I can only describe as predatory focus. He's not looking at anyone else. He's looking directly at me. The crowd parts, not deliberately, but instinctively, the way crowds do when an alpha's full attention becomes a physical force in a room. I watch women in beautiful gowns step aside, watch conversations die mid-sentence, watch the entire ballroom reorganize itself around his trajectory, toward me. I consider, briefly and pointlessly, whether the pillar behind me offers any actual escape route, before accepting that there's nowhere to go and no way to avoid whatever is about to happen. He stops directly in front of me, close enough that I have to tilt my head back to meet his eyes properly, close enough that I can smell winter pine and something else. Something old and powerful that I understand, distantly, is the scent of his wolf just beneath the surface. You, he says. Me, I confirm, because apparently that's the sophisticated response I'm capable of under this level of scrutiny. You've been standing here the entire evening, he says, behind that pillar. I have excellent taste in architecture, I say, and immediately regret it. Because sarcasm probably isn't the recommended response to an alpha king who's just abandoned 300 carefully prepared omegas to stand in front of you specifically. But he laughs. It's genuine, surprised, warm, completely at odds with the formal distance he's shown every other woman tonight. Several nearby guests actually gasp at the sound, like they've witnessed something scandalous. "What's your name?" he asks. "Elin," I say, "of Thornwood Province." Which is, I should mention, extremely far down the alphabetical presentation order, so I apologize if I've disrupted your schedule. "You haven't disrupted anything," he says. "I've been watching you for the last hour." That seems statistically unlikely given there are 300 other women in this room, most of whom are dressed for exactly this kind of attention. "I know," he says. "That's rather the point. The explanation the ballroom is still watching, still frozen in that particular horrified fascination that comes from witnessing social catastrophe unfold in real time. I'm aware, distantly, of my aunt somewhere in the crowd, probably experiencing some combination of triumph and terror at what's happening. I don't understand, I tell him honestly, because pretending sophistication at this point seems pointless. I wore the plainest dress I own specifically to avoid your attention. I positioned myself as far from the receiving line as possible. Everything about my presence here tonight was engineered toward invisibility." "I noticed that too," he says. "It's remarkable, actually, how deliberately you avoided everything the other women were doing. Every single person in this room dressed to be seen. You dressed to disappear. And instead of disappearing, you became the only person I actually noticed. That seems like an unfortunate side effect of my strategy. Or the entire point," he says. 300 women spent months preparing to catch my attention through spectacle. You spent the same months, apparently, preparing to avoid it entirely. And here's what I noticed. Standing at that receiving line for the last hour, everyone performing interest in me. Everyone performing charm, wit, whatever quality they'd calculated might appeal to an alpha king. It was exhausting, actually, watching 300 variations of the same performance. And I wasn't performing. You were the only genuine thing in the room, he says. I don't know anything about you yet. I don't know if we'd suit each other, if this is anything beyond curiosity, if the fact that you tried to hide from me means anything beyond wanting to be left alone. But I know that everyone else in this room was showing me what they thought I wanted to see. You were just being exactly who you are, which happened to be someone who very clearly didn't want to be here. I really didn't, I confirm. Why? He asks, and there's genuine curiosity in it, not offense. I consider lying, softening it, offering the kind of diplomatic answer that wouldn't risk insulting an alpha king in front of 300 witnesses. But something about his directness makes me want to match it. Because mating ceremonies are spectacle, I say. They reduce people to performances. They ask women to compress their entire personalities into 90-second presentations designed to appeal to a stranger's momentary interest. I don't think that's how anyone should choose a partner. I think it's how you choose a decoration. The room has gone completely silent now. I'm aware, somewhere in the back of my mind, that I've just criticized the entire ceremonial tradition to the Alpha King's face, in front of his court, in front of 300 women who spent months preparing for exactly the spectacle I've just condemned. He doesn't look offended. He looks fascinated. The challenge, so what would you suggest instead? He asks. If not this. I don't know, I admit. I'm not offering solutions to kingdom-wide mating traditions. I'm just explaining why I wore a gray dress and hid behind a pillar. Humor me, he says. What would you want if you were choosing how to be known by someone? I think about this seriously, because he seems to genuinely want an answer, not just conversation to fill space. Time, I say finally. Actual time, not 90 seconds in a receiving line. Conversation that isn't performed for an audience. The chance to be difficult sometimes, to disagree, to not be immediately charming, and see if someone's interest survives that. I'd want to be known slowly, the way you actually know anyone worth knowing, instead of selected based on a single evening of careful presentation. That's not how this ceremony works, he says. I'm aware, I say, which is why I tried to avoid it entirely. He's quiet for a moment, studying me with an intensity that makes me want to retreat back behind my pillar, except he's standing directly in the path I'd need to take. What if I changed how it worked? He asks. You can't just, I start, but he's already turning to address the room. The formal presentation is concluded, he announces, and his voice carries the kind of authority that ends conversations before they've properly begun. I'm grateful to every family who traveled here, to every Omega who prepared for this evening, but I've decided the traditional process doesn't serve what I'm actually looking for. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. I can see my aunt, near the front, looking simultaneously mortified and cautiously hopeful. Instead, he continues, I'm inviting 6 Omegas to remain at the palace for the next month. Not for further ceremony, for actual time. Conversation. The chance to be known beyond a single evening's performance. He turns back to me. You'll be one of them, he says, if you're willing. That's not really a choice if you're announcing it in front of the entire court, I point out. You're right, he says, and lowers his voice so only I can hear it clearly. So I'm asking properly, privately, in the only way that matters, will you stay? Not because I'm commanding it, because I'd like the chance to actually know you, the way you just described wanting to be known. And you're allowed to say no. I look at him, really look. Past the crown and the authority and the gold eyes that have apparently made a decision about me in 3 seconds that took the rest of the room hours to even register. I'll stay, I say, but only because I'm curious now, not because I've changed my mind about spectacle. That's fair, he says, and something like relief crosses his face. That's more than fair. The next 4 weeks are nothing like the ceremony that started them. He keeps his word about time, about actual conversation instead of performance. I'm given rooms in the palace, invited to meals that aren't formal courtly displays, but genuine, sometimes awkward attempts at getting to know each other. The 5 other Omegas he's invited are equally curious, equally confused by this deviation from tradition, and we form an unlikely camaraderie built on shared bewilderment. Aldrich and I argue more than we agree in those early weeks. I challenge his assumptions about kingdom policy, about the treatment of Omegas in provincial territories, about the very tradition that brought me here in the first place. He pushes back, defends positions I don't expect him to hold, occasionally admits I've changed his mind about something. It's nothing like the fairy tale version of courtship I'd imagined mating ceremonies produced. It's messier, more honest, built on actual disagreement instead of performed charm. Why me? I ask him, 3 weeks in, during one of our evening walks through the palace gardens. Really, not the version you gave the whole ballroom, the actual reason. He's quiet for a while before answering. Because you were the only person in that room not asking me for anything, he says. Every other woman there wanted something: status, security, the prestige of being chosen. Understandable wants, I don't judge them for it. But you didn't want any of that. You actively didn't want to be there. And something about that made me curious in a way nothing else that evening did. I wanted to know what someone who didn't want anything from me was actually like. And now that you know, now I know you're difficult, he says, smiling, opinionated, uninterested in flattering me just because I'm powerful. You've criticized 3 separate kingdom policies in the last 3 weeks alone. Is that a complaint? It's the opposite of a complaint, he says. It's the first time in my life someone has treated me like a person worth arguing with instead of a power worth appeasing. The decision at the end of the month, he asks me the question everyone's been expecting since the night of the ceremony, but he asks it differently than tradition demands. Not in a formal presentation, not with witnesses, not with the pressure of ceremony and audience. He asks it in the garden, at dusk, with no one else present. I'd like you to stay, he says. Not because of that first night, not because of spectacle or expectation. Because I've spent a month actually knowing you, and I know, that I want to keep knowing you for considerably longer than a month. You barely know me, I say, though it's less true now than it was on the night I hid behind a pillar. I know you challenge me more than anyone in my court. I know you care more about fairness than about status. I know you'd rather disappear into a crowd than be seen for the wrong reasons. And that when you finally decided to be seen anyway, it was because you'd chosen to, not because you were performing for an audience. That's a lot to know after a month. It's more than most people learn in years, he says, because you let me actually see you, instead of showing me what you thought I wanted. I think about the version of myself who walked into that ballroom in a gray dress, determined to disappear, certain that invisibility was the only power available to her. I think about how wrong I was, not about the ceremony being spectacle, because it was, but about invisibility being the answer. Sometimes the answer isn't hiding. Sometimes it's refusing to perform and trusting that the right person will notice the difference. Yes, I tell him, I'll stay. Not because of the crown, not because of the ceremony, not because 300 other women wanted this and I somehow won some competition I didn't want to enter. I'll stay because this month has been the first time in my life someone's actually wanted to know me instead of a version of me. Epilogue. The next ceremony 10 years later. When the next mating ceremony convenes for our own kingdom's newest generation, I'm the one standing beside the throne instead of hiding behind a pillar. I've changed the ceremony. The way I once suggested might be possible in a garden conversation on a night when I expected nothing except to survive an evening undetected. There's still a formal presentation. Tradition doesn't disappear overnight, and some ceremony has value in marking significant transitions. But now, every participant is guaranteed a month of actual acquaintance before any decision is expected. Now, no one is required to perform charm they don't feel. Now, the quiet ones, the difficult ones, the ones who'd rather disappear than perform, have exactly as much chance as the ones who arrive glittering in silk. I watch the newest alpha, our son, actually, presiding over his own first ceremony with the same careful attention his father once showed me. And I wonder if he'll notice someone hiding at the back of the room, someone who's decided spectacle isn't worth performing. I hope he does, because sometimes the person worth 300 careful presentations isn't the one who prepared the most. Sometimes it's the one who showed up exactly as herself, expecting nothing, and trusted that if anyone truly saw her, 3 seconds would be enough. It was enough for me.
The knock comes at midnight, 3 days after the worst night of my life. I almost don't answer it. I've spent 3 days convincing myself that humiliation has a bottom, that I've already hit it, that nothing left in this world could make the ache in my chest any sharper. But the knock comes again, patient and quiet, and something in the rhythm of it makes me open the door anyway. He's standing there alone. No guards, no ceremonial escort, no crown even, just him, in a plain travelling cloak, looking like he hasn't slept since the selection. I made a mistake, King Ashen says. I stare at him, 3 days of carefully rebuilt composure cracking instantly. You had one job that night, I say, my voice shaking with an anger I didn't know I was still carrying. You had to choose. And you chose everyone except me, in front of the entire kingdom. I know, he says. That's why I'm here. The selection I need to explain what happened 3 nights ago. Because nothing about tonight makes sense without understanding the specific cruelty of that evening. The royal selection happens once, when an alpha king is ready to choose his mate from among the kingdom's eligible omegas. Unlike smaller provincial ceremonies, the selection is public spectacle on a massive scale. Every candidate presented formally, examined, questioned, and ultimately either chosen or dismissed in front of the assembled court and half the kingdom's nobility. I was one of 40 candidates that night. 40 women who'd spent months preparing, each hoping that some quality we possessed, beauty, wit, lineage, the particular chemistry that supposedly marks a true mate bond, would be enough to secure a future none of us fully understood, but all of us had been raised to want. I made it to the final round. Just me and 2 other candidates, standing before King Ashen while the entire court watched, waiting for his decision. He chose neither of the other 2. He chose me. I remember the moment with painful clarity, his hand extended toward me. The crowd already shifting toward celebration, my own heart hammering with something between terror and disbelief. And then, just as his fingers were about to close around mine, he stopped. He looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable crossing his face, and then he withdrew his hand. I apologize, he said, loud enough for the entire court to hear. I've made an error in judgment. This isn't the right choice. And then, in front of everyone, my family, the other candidates, half the kingdom's assembled nobility, he walked away from me and selected no one at all, declaring the selection concluded without a chosen mate, leaving me standing alone on the dais while 300 people watched my humiliation unfold in real time. I don't remember the walk home. I remember crying so hard I could barely see the road, my mother trying to offer comfort that felt hollow against the specific public nature of what had just happened. I remember thinking that I would never fully recover from being chosen, and then, in the same breath, unchosen in front of everyone I'd ever know. I told myself I was done. Done with selections, done with alphas, done with the particular cruelty of a system that reduces women to spectacle and then discards them without explanation. 3 days later, he's standing at my door. The explanation you have exactly as long as it takes me to close this door to explain yourself. I tell him, my hand still on the doorframe, not fully committing to letting him inside. That's fair, he says. More than fair, actually, given what I did. So explain. He's quiet for a moment, and I notice, despite my anger, how genuinely exhausted he looks. Not performing exhaustion for sympathy, actually depleted, the way someone looks after days without proper sleep. When I reached for your hand, he says, I felt something. A pull, immediate and overwhelming, the kind of recognition every story describes, but that I'd never actually experienced, despite meeting hundreds of candidates over the years. And it terrified me. That's not an explanation. That's an excuse. Let me finish, he says. And there's something raw in his voice that makes me pause. I panicked, not because of you specifically, but because of what that recognition meant. My father chose my mother through exactly that kind of overwhelming pull, and it destroyed both of them. He became obsessive, controlling, convinced that the intensity of the bond gave him ownership over her entire existence. She spent 20 years slowly disappearing into what he needed her to be, until there was nothing left of who she'd actually been before him. I hadn't expected this. I'd expected excuses about political considerations, about advisors' concerns, about anything except this specific painful vulnerability. So you rejected me because you were afraid of becoming your father, I say slowly. Yes, he admits. In the moment, standing there feeling that pull toward you, all I could think about was watching my mother disappear for 2 decades. And I panicked. I made a choice based on fear instead of thought, and I hurt you catastrophically in the process, and I've spent 3 days understanding exactly how wrong that choice was. The anger, do you understand what you did to me? I ask, and the anger I've been holding for 3 days finally breaks free. You didn't just reject me privately, you did it in front of the entire kingdom. My family was there. Every candidate who lost to me in the earlier rounds was there, watching me get chosen and then discarded in the same breath. I can't walk through the market without people whispering about it. My own cousins have started avoiding me because being associated with public humiliation is apparently contagious. I know, he says. I've heard the same whispers. I've watched the same avoidance happening around my own court, actually, because half my advisors think I've lost my mind, and the other half think I've finally shown proper caution about mate bonds. So which is it? Did you lose your mind, or did you show proper caution? Neither, he says. I made a mistake born from fear, and I've spent 3 days trying to figure out how to fix something that felt unfixable. Because I can't undo the humiliation. I can't take back what happened in that court, or the whispers, or the damage to your reputation. All I can do is tell you the truth now. Even though the truth doesn't erase what my fear cost you. What is the truth? I ask, though part of me is terrified of the answer. That I've thought about you every hour since that night, he says. Not with regret about the recognition I felt, regret about how I responded to it. I keep replaying the moment, imagining what would have happened if I'd simply chosen you instead of running from what that choice meant. I've built an entire future in my head, over 3 sleepless nights, of what might have been possible if fear hadn't made the decision for me. The vulnerability you can't just show up at midnight and expect 3 days of humiliation to disappear because you've had a change of heart, I say, though my voice has lost some of its earlier fire. I'm not expecting that, he says. I'm not expecting anything, actually. I came here without guards, without ceremony, without any of the trappings that usually accompany royal decisions. Specifically because I wanted you to understand this isn't political calculation. This is me, alone, admitting I was wrong, with no way to protect my own dignity if you decide to close this door and never speak to me again. That's a significant risk for a king to take. It's nothing compared to the risk you took, he says. Standing on that dais, hoping to be chosen, knowing that if you were, your entire life would change irrevocably. You risked everything that night, and I responded to your courage with cowardice. The least I can do now is match that risk with my own vulnerability. I study him for a long moment, this man who publicly humiliated me 3 days ago, now standing at my door in the middle of the night, offering an explanation that's more honest than anything I expected from someone with his power and status. What do you actually want? I ask. Say it plainly. Not political language. Not diplomatic softening. What are you asking for? A second chance, he says. Not to redo the selection. That ceremony is finished, and I understand if you never want to participate in anything resembling it again. Just a chance to know you properly. Real conversation. Real time. Without the pressure of public spectacle or immediate decision. I want to prove that what I felt reaching for your hand wasn't a mistake. The mistake was how I responded to it. The hesitation I need you to understand something, I tell him, finally stepping back from the doorway, though I haven't yet invited him inside. Even if I believe everything you're telling me, Even if this is genuine and not some elaborate political recovery strategy, you still humiliated me in front of everyone I know. That doesn't disappear, because you've explained your reasoning. I know, he says. I'm not asking you to forget it. I'm asking you to let me try to earn something different going forward, understanding that the damage already done stays done. I can't undo 3 days of public humiliation. I can only try to build something honest enough that eventually the humiliation becomes a difficult memory instead of the entire story. That's going to take time. I have time, he says. I have nothing but time, actually, since I declared the selection concluded without a chosen mate. My advisors are furious. The kingdom's succession planning is in chaos. I've created exactly the kind of political mess my father would have avoided through decisive action, and I did it because some part of me understood, even in the moment of panic, that choosing anyone except you would have been the greater mistake. I let this sink in. The reality that his rejection wasn't just of me specifically, but of the entire process, of every other candidate, of the whole spectacle that brought us to that dais in the first place. You ended the selection entirely, I say slowly. Not just my chance, everyone's. Because the recognition I felt wasn't something I could simply transfer to someone else, he says. If I couldn't have you, choosing anyone else would have been its own kind of lie, performing a bond I didn't actually feel, for the sake of political convenience. I'd rather face a succession crisis than build my entire reign on that kind of dishonesty. The decision I'm not saying yes to anything tonight, I tell him. And I watch something like acceptance, not disappointment, cross his face. I need time to think about whether I can trust this, whether the risk of being humiliated again is worth whatever you're actually offering. That's fair, he says. More than fair. But I'm not closing the door either, I continue, surprising myself with the admission. Not because I've forgiven what happened 3 days ago. Because you came here alone, at midnight, with nothing protecting your dignity if I'd simply turned you away. That took more courage than choosing me on that dais would have taken, honestly, and I think that courage deserves at least the chance for me to consider what you're actually offering. Thank you, he says, and the relief in his voice is genuine, unguarded in a way that surprises me from someone with his power and status. Don't thank me yet, I say. This isn't forgiveness. This is the possibility of eventually getting there. If you can prove that tonight wasn't just panic responding to panic. I understand, he says. I'll take that possibility. It's more than I deserved when I knocked on this door. The weeks after what follows isn't the fairy tale reconciliation the kingdom's gossips probably expect. Given how thoroughly the story of the selection's dramatic collapse has spread through every province by now. It's slower than that. More careful. He visits without ceremony, usually in the evenings, and our conversations start hesitant and formal before gradually becoming something more honest. I learn about his father's 20-year destruction of his mother's identity, about the specific terror that recognition triggered in him, because he'd spent his entire childhood watching what an overwhelming bond could do to someone who never learned to resist it. He learns about my own family, my father's death when I was 12, the specific vulnerability of growing up as the eldest daughter in a family without enough resources, the particular desperation that made the selection feel less like opportunity and more like obligation. Would you have chosen this? He asks me, several weeks into our careful reacquaintance, during one of our evening conversations in my family's modest garden. The selection, I mean. If your circumstances had been different, if there hadn't been financial pressure pushing you toward participating, I consider this honestly. I don't know. Probably not. I think I would have preferred choosing someone slowly, the way we're doing now, instead of a spectacle designed to produce instant decisions about someone's entire future. I've been thinking about that too, he says, about whether the entire selection tradition needs to change, whether reducing this kind of decision to a single public ceremony ever actually served anyone well, or whether it just performed decisiveness while ignoring the actual complexity of choosing a life partner. Is that something you can change? As king, I can try, he says. I've already started drafting reforms with my council, longer courtship periods, private introductions instead of public spectacle, the option for candidates to withdraw without public humiliation if they change their minds partway through. Nothing that erases what happened to you, but something that might prevent it happening to anyone else. The trust rebuilds slowly, the way it should after genuine damage. And I find myself grateful that he never pushes for it to move faster than feels honest. There are difficult conversations. Moments where my anger resurfaces unexpectedly, triggered by an overheard comment about the selection, by a family member's careful avoidance of the topic, by my own memory suddenly replaying the specific horror of standing alone on that dais while the whole court watched. He never dismisses this anger or asks me to move past it faster than I'm ready to. He simply stays present through it, absorbing the difficult conversations without defensiveness, understanding that rebuilding trust means accepting that the damage doesn't disappear just because his intentions have changed. I keep waiting for you to get tired of my anger, I tell him, 4 months into our careful courtship, during an evening where a particularly painful memory of the selection resurfaced unexpectedly. I won't, he says simply, because I earned it. Every time it resurfaces, I'm reminded of exactly what my fear cost you, and that reminder keeps me honest about how much better I need to be going forward. That's not a very romantic sentiment, I point out, though something in his steadiness makes me smile despite myself. Romance isn't the goal right now, he says. Trust is. Romance can come after, once you actually believe I'm not going to panic and disappear again the moment things become genuinely serious. The proposal he asks me to be his mate almost a year after the disastrous selection, in a moment nothing like the public spectacle that started this entire story. There's no court watching, no ceremonial dice, no audience waiting to judge whether his choice meets their expectations. Just the two of us. In the garden where we've spent countless evenings slowly rebuilding what his panic destroyed, with nothing but genuine conversation between us. I'm not going to reach for your hand and then pull away this time, he says, though he makes no move to actually touch me, understanding, after a year of careful rebuilding, that the choice needs to be entirely mine to make. I'm asking plainly, without spectacle or public pressure, will you be my mate? Not because recognition demands it, because I've spent a year actually knowing you. And everything I've learned has only confirmed what I felt reaching for your hand that night, before fear made a different choice for me. I think about the girl who cried the entire walk home from that humiliating selection, who told herself she was done with alphas and ceremonies, and the particular cruelty of public spectacle. I think about the year since, the careful rebuilding, the honest conversations, the way trust actually gets earned instead of assumed. Yes, I tell him. Not because you're king, not because the recognition demands it, but because I've spent this year actually knowing you too. And I trust what we've built enough to choose it deliberately. Epilogue. The new tradition 2 years after the selection that started this story with such public humiliation, King Ashen's reforms to the royal courtship tradition have taken full effect. There's no more public spectacle demanding instant decisions in front of assembled courts. Instead, candidates are introduced privately, given real time to determine compatibility before any public announcement occurs, and given the explicit right to withdraw without shame if the connection doesn't develop as expected. I helped design much of this reform, actually, drawing on my own experience of exactly what public humiliation cost someone who trusted a broken system to treat her fairly. It feels strange, sometimes, that the worst night of my life became the catalyst for changing an entire kingdom's approach to how alphas choose their mates. Do you ever regret it? I ask Ashen sometimes. The panic, the public rejection, everything that happened that night. I regret the pain it caused you, he always says. I'll never stop regretting that specific damage. But I don't regret where it led us. Because I don't think we would have built something this honest if we'd started with the immediate, unexamined recognition instead of working through genuine fear first. I think he's right, though the path here cost more than either of us should have had to pay. Sometimes healing looks like a knock at midnight, someone standing alone with no protection for their dignity, admitting they were wrong. Sometimes trust gets rebuilt one honest conversation at a time, slowly enough that it actually holds when tested. And sometimes the worst night of your life becomes, eventually, simply the beginning of a much longer, much better story. One built not on instant recognition, but on the harder, more valuable work of choosing each other, deliberately, again and again, until the choosing itself becomes the thing worth trusting.